Welcome back to Empowered. My name is Loren Spagnuolo, and we're going to continue our conversation today with Bonnie Davis, who is the founder of Family Continuum. And we'll just continue on with the discussion of craniosacral therapy. And this might be a new term for you, but we'll give you some sites to look up, and you can always use Google to find out what that is. And it's a really magical therapy for not only babies, but for adults. So I wanted just to talk to you about going back to one of the questions that I asked you earlier, and what prompts someone to seek craniosacral therapy, but as an adult, you know, what's the common theme? What's that something that doesn't feel quite right? I'm dealing with either repeated depression or anxiety or anything of that, you know, an uncomfortable emotion that we're actually not, you know, we're not taught to recognize and acknowledge and think there's something wrong and such. But as an adult, how would that serve me? How would craniosacral therapy serve me?
Well, one of the main things that I work with if someone comes in, for example, who's struggling with anxiety. Oftentimes there's a difficulty about being in their body, or there's a disconnection with being in their body. So part of craniosacral therapy, when someone comes and lies on the table, part of me is working with their nervous system, but part of me is working to help them be embodied, help them actually feel sensations in their own body. Because often what happens with trauma, for example, is it takes us out of our bodies.
Right.
It's like, it's not comfortable to be in my body. I don't like what's happening here. And so there's a disconnection that can happen. And often it happens in early childhood where things are not safe and we kind of just disconnect, we dissociate.
Right.
And so part of what I work with a client is to help them come back into their bodies and have a felt sense in their bodies of what is it like to actually feel safe right now. Because a lot of us didn't feel safe. You know, a lot of clients that come in and I say to them, is there any part of your body that feels safe right now? And they say to me, Bonnie, I don't know what that means to feel safe in my body. And a lot of it comes from how we're parented early on. Again, that early foundation, that first 2 years of life, where we need to have a felt sense in our bodies of what is it like to feel safe in this world? What is it like to feel protected? What does it feel like to feel trust? And do I have that in my family? And I think those are a lot of the roots of anxiety, a lot of the roots of depression are from our early history. And they've been able to trace that back now with research to say a lot of those roots come from our early attachment.
How does, as an adult, right, and you're talking about earlier about attachment therapy, so how does that affect my relationship with other, like, so my relationship with a partner?
That's a really good question.
You know, because everything is so, it's threaded in and we're all connected. This is another thing that we're not realizing, you know, to be in community, you know, with however a community looks like for us, but yes, our partner. How does that play into it?
Well, what the research shows, there's a new research study that just came out of the University of Minnesota, and it was a huge study of 32 years where they took two groups of families, one where the child was receiving from their parent sensitive, responsive caregiving. So the parent was there. The parent was responding to the child's needs with a sensitivity, with an acknowledgement of their feelings. And so they tracked those children. And then they had another group of children who didn't have that kind of caregiving. It was more the old parenting paradigm of authoritarian parenting, like, you do what I say or else, you know, the kind of threatening, where a child's not going to necessarily feel safe. And they tracked both of those children for 32 years. So they tracked them into adulthood. And what they noticed was that the children who had sensitive, responsive caregiving from early on, from birth, especially in those first 3 years when you're forming that foundation, those children did better socially, so they came into relationship much easier with other children. They did better in romantic relationships, and they did better academically because they were settled enough in themselves that they could actually focus on their schoolwork. The other children didn't do so well. So now we have these huge studies that are saying, yes, We know why this early attachment is so, so important, because it forms the base that everything grows on top of.
Right. Are you consistently having to look for studies to support your work?
I don't have to look for studies, but I like to have studies just to say, yes, I'm not talking here just out of my opinion.
Right.
Here's some proof.
Well, I also think that as a society, we're so in our left brain, that we need the proof, that we need to have all the scientific backup. And I think that's all well and good. But at some point, we have to really drive from a place of intuition and knowing.
Absolutely.
And so, and I'm wondering with this work, with your, when you're working with adults, how you get them to shift that awareness and understanding as well.
That's a great question. I really, again, support, when I'm working with an adult, I'm really supporting them to come into themselves, to find an authentic relationship with themselves, and then from that place be able to relate to somebody else. Because what happens to us early on is, if we have adverse experiences, in our early childhood, it affects our ability it becomes internalized. So if I get treated poorly, then I start to feel poorly about myself, and then it's really hard for me to relate to somebody else.
Right.
And so that's how those early imprints work. And so anytime I'm working with an adult, it's how do I bring them back into themselves? Whoops, I just touched my microphone. How do I bring them back into themselves so that they can feel themselves again and connect in with who they are? And that will naturally help them to be able to relate outwards to their partner or to their child or to their coworker. Because it's all about relationship.
Right.
It's all about relationship.
Well, it sounds like also it could be a nice enhancement if someone were to seek talk therapy. Would be...
Yeah, and talk therapy, I think, has its benefits, but I think talk therapy also doesn't incorporate the body. And so I use a real somatic approach.
Okay.
So it's not just, we're not just talking here, but I'm going to also be checking into how you're doing on the inside.
Yeah, and some of us may be new to that word, somatic.
Somatic.
Soma
So basically,
is
body-based therapy.
Right.
Because there's only so much we can do with up here. Because what happens to us happens to all of us. It happens to our whole body. Our physiology gets affected. Our nervous system gets affected by what happens to us early on.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you, Bonnie. We're about to take another break, and I'm Loren Spagnuolo with Empowered. Thanks for joining.